Welcome to Dreddy Says, out to put the Insta360 One RS up against its slightly older brother, the One R. Most of this will be filmed in 4K 30, but check down below in the image and you can see what I'm shooting at. Now this is the second shoot, because the first one I made a big mistake. I left the sharpness on high. Now, we will get to that a little bit later in the review, but it's very important that you don't make the same mistake. So, without further ado, One R versus One RS. Let's go. Here we go, your bog standard, basic side-by-side comparison for the One R and the One RS. We're shooting in 4K, 30 frames a second, a pretty standard sort of format that I use for most of my action video stuff, unless I'm doing slow-mo, but we'll get into that a little later on. So, let's compare them. How are they looking? How are the colours? Is the 4K boost lens helping with that larger half-inch sensor? Is it getting the colours? It's quite a sort of average colour day. It's a good day to test it. It's not particularly bright, it's not particularly dark, but there are opportunities for us to look at dynamic range, which we will get into very shortly. 4K 30 side-by-side comparison. I will note that almost all of these little bits of footage will be shot in fully automatic mode. Both cameras, auto white balance, auto exposure, auto, what are the other options? Standard color profile, that is very important, and auto EV, so the sort of brightness control, exposure value. So everything standard, everything auto, straight out of the box. I'll say it again, turn sharpness to low. Now the reason for this is pretty much where I was when I filmed the first time, and we're going to have a quick look now side by side just with the One RS, showing you the difference between low sharpness and very high sharpness. It's artificial. You can see jagged lines on the poles, and you can add sharpness in post. It's quite a simple process. Now you might want to find what works for you if you're not quite sure about working in post-production and adding the sharpness. Medium is quite good, but I always set it low. You can add sharpness, but you can't take it away in post. That is something to bear in mind. Very high sharpness will ruin all of your footage for good. All right, on to the next. Okay, Active HDR. So with the One RS, they claim to have better Active HDR, so it actually adjusts in real time during your shot. I'm now walking through shadow of trees, so the blacks and whites, the highlights and lowlights should be coming and going. It'll be interesting to see how it makes it out. And there's a pretty raptor. Be interesting to see how the Active HDR does compared to the One R. Now they do nest round here. It's nice to see them. They're just checking, seeing what's going on. But this is the Active HDR Test 4K, 30 frames a second. And let's get out into the sunlight. And here we go, sunlight. Sun directly behind me. We'll see how the two cameras deal with it. Here comes the puppy. Good boy. Good boy, come on. Right, Active HDR versus Standard HDR. 6K mode, cinematic. This is quite an interesting feature. It's in a completely different ratio with your letterboxing to give it that cinematic feel. And it's also running at 24 frames a second. So things look a bit more cinematic and dynamic. Baxter, come on, boy. Let's see if I can get him to run past and we'll see how cinematic it looks. Here we go. Now, I'm sure I won't be winning any Oscars with that performance, and neither will he. So, I know this is terrible in low light, like really, really bad. Let's show you a little clip right now of me out on my motorbike in the 6K mode and see how it actually comes out. You can see that the auto ISO in the camera is really struggling. There's no dynamic range. Basically, the blacks are all broken up because of the high ISO. The ISO is the camera trying to compensate for low light and basically make it up as it goes along. So I'm testing this now in this sort of light to dark bit in the lee side of the woods, and we'll see how this 6K cinematic mode, 24 frames, comes out in post. Right, here we are back in the studio. I've looked at the footage now in post and wow, I'm impressed. The One RS compared to the One R, it's evolution, not revolution, as Insta claim, and I completely agree. You've had 2 solid years of the Insta One R, and they've updated it, they've added features which I didn't think were possible, but they've done it. So what they've done is they've admitted now that the One R, the Insta360 One R, is now at the end of its actual sort of upgrade life. So they brought out the RS, and a lot of people have complained. They were like, there's not enough. Yes, there is. Look at the footage that we've just checked out in this video. The Active HDR mode is absolutely glorious. And that 1/2-inch sensor on the One RS really makes a difference. It gives you the highlights, it gives you the shadows. So you've got all that information in the camera. The stabilization is better, only marginally, but it is better, and it was good anyway. The cinematic 6K mode, yeah, it's all right. I probably won't use it, and you do have to run the footage through the app to add stabilization. But wow, what a difference. I'm going to use the Active HDR mode as probably my go-to mode now for most of my stuff, especially when I'm out surfing or on the paddleboard, and it requires very little post-production, which is great. Remember, knock that sharpness down to low, or if you don't want to sharpen it in post, maybe medium, but on very high. As we saw in the video, it's completely unusable and completely pointless. So like and subscribe if you found this useful. There are more Insta360 One RS videos coming up. One on the stills. I mean, it's got 3 times the megapixels of the One R, and what I've already seen and some of the pictures I've taken, even, well, especially in HDR mode, are phenomenal for an action camera. So that's it. I'm impressed. I'm happy. The video tests were a massive success in my eyes. And that's it from me. All right, guys. Catch you for the next one.